The house lights were dimmed to that flattering hotel glow that makes every surface look expensive and every face seem certain. A polished demo unit sat on a pedestal under a narrow beam, humming softly like it belonged to the future. People whispered in rows of gray chairs, the air full of cologne and carbon copy investor talk. At the front, my sister's photograph smiled from a 10-foot screen emerald blazer confident posture, the caption calling her founder and CEO. I sat in the last row with a baseball cap pulled low, hands clenched beneath my jacket, listening to my own numbers ring out in her voice. 97% accuracy, 42% energy reduction. The words landed like small, clean cuts, too precise to bleed too deep to ignore. Somewhere near the front, my father stood to clap first. Before I take you further, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if someone ever took something you built and wore it like their own skin, hit the like button, share this with a friend who needs the reminder, and make sure you're subscribed so you won't miss what comes next. To understand how that room filled with borrowed light, you need to know where it began under a different lamp, in a much smaller room with coffee rings on an oak table. I was the child who counted breaths between thunder and lightning, who kept a lined notebook of questions taped to the inside of my closet. Our kitchen was a quiet laboratory. My father turned forks and napkin rings into orbital models. My mother measured sugar like molarity and told us bread rose because living things wanted to rise. We were a family of explanations. If something broke, you held the pieces and asked better questions. Olivia was 3 years ahead of me and 3 steps faster through every door. She ran speeches without notes and charmed substitute teachers who didn't yet know her tells. I grew in her shade and liked that cooler there, fewer eyes, more time to tinker. On Saturdays, we built small things that felt big to us, a pencil-sorting robot that chewed through markers like candy, a mousetrap car that pinched my thumb and made us both howl laughing. She was the one who named our projects, and I was the one who made them work. Then we left for college and split along our strengths. I went to engineering, a place where proof earned its applause. Olivia took marketing, a world that loved the right word at the right time. We stayed close anyway. Sunday coffees turned into a ritual after I moved back home. Same booth-chipped mug, her bracelets clacking softly while she talked about campaigns that landed or fizzled. I listened, then told her about small inventions that saved the annoyance of a day. A bike lamp that brightened with the streetlights. A plant system that watered only when the soil was truly thirsty. Nothing earth-shaking, but each one taught me a cleaner line, a steadier test, a better way to fail. 3 years ago, I started watching our office after hours, the way empty rooms still burned light, like stubborn candles, and vents pushed cold air into hallways where nobody walked. Waste makes a certain sound when you notice it. It's a low, constant hum that turns into a challenge. I began sketching in the margins of a legal pad, arrows, loops, patterns crawling into each other. What if a building could learn its people the way people learn their morning? If the lights could rise when footsteps approached and rest when the last door clicked shut? I built a small brain for that question, crude at first, then cleaner. My savings thinned like a winter coat. My social life narrowed to a standing rain check. I kept going, soldering before work, testing after dinner, naming the versions like hurricanes. By version 7, my apartment breathed with me. Rooms brightened when I entered, heaters woke just before dawn. The meter turned slower. 97%. 42%. Numbers that felt like a held breath, finally released. When Olivia's agency lost a few big accounts, she came to our Sunday coffee with a brave smile and a tremor under it. She was 36 and exhausted, the kind of tired that looks fine in a mirror until the light changes. I invited her over that night because I wanted to give her a win, if not hers, then mine and ours, by proximity. I set the prototype on the kitchen counter, its small LED pulsing like a heartbeat, and told her the story that had kept me through 2 winters. She listened with her whole body leaning forward, eyes bright, interrupting only to connect a dot I hadn't seen in the broader picture. When I finished, she gripped my forearms. "Robin, this is huge," she said, and her voice carried the old sister sound. I remembered our garage in summer, the buzz of sawdust and a fan. "Let me help you show it to people who'll get it. You build." I'll frame the story. It is an easy thing in a quiet kitchen with the right promise to hand over a spare key. Sometimes it's not a key made of brass. We started meeting on weeknights, planning imaginary slides made real. Her questions grew detailed in a way that flattered me. What model are you using to detect occupancy? How do you smooth the peaks and valleys in demand? Is your learning adaptive to seasonal schedules? I answered, because I loved the work, and because she was my sister. She kept notes in a narrow looping hand I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists. When she asked for a full copy of the documentation so I won't get anything wrong, I opened my cloud folder and sent the link. Trust is a door you don't hear close until it does. Then came little changes in the room I know as well as my own skin. A breadboard angled differently than I'd left it. A coil of wire unspooled an extra inch. A file with a last open time that didn't match my morning. She said I was being forgetful. She laughed when I asked whether she'd dropped by while I was out. "Maybe you just need more sleep," she said, with a smile that softened the rebuke. We kept meeting. She started canceling. Worker text said, "Big pitch." Sundays went quiet. Our parents told me she was studying sustainability now, and I tried to be happy for her because that's what I'd always tried to be. The discovery didn't arrive like thunder. It came over lunch in a sandwich shop with tile floors and a bell on the door where Elliot mentioned a startup he'd heard about. Clean energy thing, he said, wiping mustard from a cuff. Founded by a woman with a marketing background, claims a breakthrough algorithm. EOSync Tech. The name pried something open behind my ribs. I searched it on my phone while the bell rang again and again for strangers who are not me. A clean logo shaped like a leaf built from a circuit. A mission statement that read like my late-night notes had been sent to a copywriter. A photograph of Olivia in green. Her smile held my numbers behind it. I walked 3 blocks in a drizzly line of traffic before my legs remembered to stop. That night, my apartment felt colder with the lights doing exactly what I'd trained them to do. I followed links into deeper rooms, a launch timeline, a press kit, a polished demo unit with my schematic behind the casing. The next day, a misdirected email landed like proof from an indifferent sky, an investor deck rehearsal schedule guest list. Our family names bracketed near the top, Mom and Dad with reserved row. My name absent, except once in a slide about competitive landscape. When I confronted her, I didn't choose a stage. I waited on the sidewalk outside her building, the concrete dark from an afternoon shower, the air smelling like wet wool and taxi exhaust. Olivia saw me and adjusted something invisible the way a person does when a photograph is about to be taken. "Robin," she said brightly, almost relieved. "I've been meaning to call." I told her I'd seen the site, the deck, the dates. For a second, the brightness flickered just a heartbeat, and then she put on the jacket of certainty that always fit her. "There's overlap," she said, like we were discussing a Venn diagram from a freshman class. I made it viable. The world around us went on working. Bus's side, a man in a blue suit cursed softly into his phone somewhere. A kitchen fan clicked on. I asked her why the demo casing she showed in a teaser video had the same non-functional notch I had cut into mine by accident, then kept out of habit because it helped me orient the board faster. She said, "Coincidence." I asked how her system hit 97% and 42 on its first pilots. She said better data. She asked if I had a patent, and in the space between her question and my answer, I saw the hole I hadn't stepped into yet. After that, she moved first. Calls to our parents in careful tones. A narrative built with clean edges she'd been working quietly for years. I was struggling to accept her success. I'd grown protective about a concept, not a product. Their replies to me were cautious, with a love I didn't doubt, which somehow made it harder. "Sweetheart," my mother said, voice low, like she was hushing a baby from a bad dream, "your sister has binders of work." My father asked for patience, asked me to remember how hard Olivia had been working to find her place. I stood by the kitchen sink and watched a drop of water collect at the tip of the faucet until it fell, and another formed. I wanted to say the right sentence that would pull back the curtain and let in the light of what was true. All I had were files and photographs and receipts for parts with my name in the top corner. That night, I stacked my notebooks in order from earliest to last and photographed the shape of their progress. I printed the parts invoices and slid them into sleeves. I labeled my own work the way a stranger might need to see it. I called a patent attorney whose name I'd circled months ago, then never dialed, because I believed my timeline was mine to control. He spoke in slow sentences the way people do when they know you're crossing a narrow bridge and can't look down. He told me what to gather. He told me to date everything I could date. He told me that priority isn't a feeling, it's a record. In the days that followed, my phone buzzed with family whispers, gracious warnings, soft suggestions to let Olivia have this one, because a win for one daughter is a win for the family. I stopped reading after the line where my aunt called me territorial in a message meant for someone else. I spent an evening at my father's old workbench in the garage, the one that still smelled like solder and orange oil, and ran my finger along the groove my teenaged elbows had worn there. A moth existed in frantic circles around the single bulb. On a shelf above the vise sat the pine box Olivia and I once used for Fine's Feathers Rocks with Stripes, a perfect sycamore leaf pressed flat as a coin. I left it where it was. The invitation to the investor presentation arrived in our family group thread from my mother, full of exclamation points and green heart emojis. "We're so proud of you, Liv," she wrote. "Robin, will you come? It'll be so special to be there together." I watched the text bubble pulse, then fade, then reappear from Olivia. "Let's keep the focus on the work. There's room for both of us in this space." The sentence was so smooth it squeaked. I set my phone face down on the table and listened to the apartment breathe, each room timing itself to the life it assumed I was living. Outside, rain started again, thin and steady, ticking softly against the window, like a clock you can only hear when the rest of the house is quiet. I picked up the investor deck and turned to the slide with the photo of the demo. That notch, my small, useless notch, caught the light like a wink from a stranger wearing your coat. The next morning, I packed my documentation into a manila envelope and slid it into the back of my closet behind winter boots I hadn't needed yet. I printed my patent application and clipped it square. I answered my mother's message with a heart and a promise I wasn't sure I'd keep. Then I looked at the spare key to my apartment, the real one brass and nicked, and laid it in the drawer where I keep the tools I reach for when something stops working. By late afternoon, the clouds lifted and left the streets shining like something polished for company. From my window, I could see the reflection of my living room lamp in the glass, warm and steady, exactly as I had designed it to be. Somewhere across town, a stage was being set and a microphone tested. My sister's name would appear in a font meant to suggest both innovation and trust. I stood very still in that light and understood with the quiet certainty of a solution finally balancing on the scale that the room I'd be walking into soon would not be one where anyone clapped for me, at least not yet. I closed the envelope, turned off the lamp, and listened to the apartment go dark in the way I'd taught it, one room at a time. That night, the apartment moved through its quiet routine, the lights dimming from room to room as the algorithm I'd built carried out its patient duties. I stood in the center of the living room, watching the walls shift from warm amber to darkness, listening to the soft mechanical sigh that always followed. It was the sound of order, of something working exactly as intended. But in the stillness that followed, I felt like a stranger inside my own design. My parents had sent another message earlier that evening, short and cheerful. They were already helping Olivia prepare for her presentation. My mother mentioned the color of her blazer. My father noted how proud he was that she was finally finding her stride. Not a word about the accusations I had tried to explain. Their faith in her was unshakable, a force I couldn't reason with. I turned the phone face down on the counter and let the screen fade to black. The following morning, I woke before sunrise and walked to the edge of the river trail that ran behind my building. The air was cold enough to sting, and mist hung low over the water. I sat on a bench and watched the city wake a delivery truck reversing an early commuter, shuffling past a single light flicking on in a far apartment window. For a long time, I stayed there, trying to decide whether to fight or simply let it go. But even as I imagined surrendering, my hands ached for the truth to be seen. I began collecting everything: old notebooks, receipts for circuit parts, time-stamped photos from early prototypes. I labeled each folder, each version, until the desk looked like a small archive of patience. The evidence gave me focus, something to hold when doubt started whispering that maybe I should have shared credit all along. When I finished, I called Thomas Reeves, the patent attorney whose card I'd kept for months. His voice was measured and kind, the tone of someone who'd heard too many stories like mine. He told me exactly what to do, how to file, what to document, when to seal the envelope. "You'll want to date every iteration," he said. "Priority isn't about emotion, it's about proof." His certainty steadied me. After the call, I made coffee strong enough to burn my tongue and watched the steam rise in thin lines through the early light. For the first time in weeks, I knew what to do next. Days passed in a rhythm of work and preparation. At my company job, I smiled when people spoke to me and kept my head down. At night, I drafted patent notes until my eyes blurred. Sleep came in small portions, shallow and restless. Sometimes I'd catch myself listening for Olivia's key in the door, though I knew she'd never use it again. The apartment held her absence like a faint scent, something that lingered after the door closed. When the patent paperwork was finally complete, I drove it myself to the downtown office and handed it over in person. The clerk stamped the date, March 15th, and slid the folder into a bin that disappeared behind a counter. The sound of the stamp echoed through the small room, final and precise. I walked back to my car, feeling both lighter and lonelier than before. Protecting my work meant accepting that the sister I once trusted no longer existed in the same form. A week later, I saw her name everywhere. EOSync Tech was gaining attention, online articles describing an emerging innovator in clean energy, accompanied by photos of Olivia in that same green blazer. Her smile was identical in every image, poised, brilliant, sincere. It hurt to look at, yet I couldn't stop scrolling. Each article repeated phrases I had written in my own notes: adaptive learning, predictive optimization, sustainable efficiency. They sounded professional, detached, stripped of the late nights and failures that had built them. I deleted the browser history and sat still until the monitor went to sleep. The room around me hummed softly, the system adjusting to my heartbeat, to the sound of my breath. I had created a machine that cared about patterns, that tried to make sense of human rhythm. I wondered if it could detect heartbreak, if it would dim the lights a little when the silence grew heavy. My parents called that weekend to check in. My mother's voice was full of excitement. "Olivia's presentation is next Thursday. You'll come, won't you? She says it's her biggest moment yet." I pressed the phone against my shoulder, staring out the window at the drizzle streaking down the glass. "I don't think I'll be there," I said. There was a pause on the other end, the kind that fills with misunderstanding. "Oh, Robin," she sighed, "don't let jealousy come between you. This is her time." After the call, I sat at the kitchen table until the sky turned from gray to dusk. The city lights came on one by one, steady and indifferent. The feeling that followed wasn't anger, it was emptiness, the kind that folds around you like a blanket you can't shake off. Family, it seemed, was a loyalty that didn't always include truth. I went back to work Monday morning and found whispers waiting for me. Someone had shared Olivia's success article in the company group chat with a caption about brilliant sisters. A few coworkers congratulated me, assuming I was part of her project. When I tried to explain that it wasn't mine, that the invention had started with me, their smiles turned polite and uncertain. Afterward, conversations shifted when I entered the room. The quiet embarrassment of doubt is worse than accusation. It makes you invisible in a crowd. By Friday, I'd stopped joining them for lunch. I took my sandwich to the roof instead, where the air was thin and honest. Below me, traffic pulsed in neat patterns of red and white. I thought about how Olivia had once said the world respected confidence more than correctness. I hadn't understood her then. Now I did. That weekend, I drove to my parents' house for Sunday dinner, hoping the familiar smell of rosemary and baked chicken might ground me. The table was set with my mother's best china. Olivia's name filled the room before I even sat down. Her new company, her upcoming investors, how she'd finally found her calling. I listened quietly, hands folded the way you do when words start building walls instead of bridges. When I tried to speak, my father interrupted with gentle firmness. "You both have talent," he said. "You'll find your place too." After dessert, Olivia's voice floated from the living room as she talked to our aunt on speakerphone. "It's going to change everything," she said, laughing softly. "This launch will finally show what I can do." Her confidence filled the house the way light fills a glass, clear, undeniable. I slipped my shoes back on and left without saying goodbye. Outside, the night was cold and clean. I sat in my car and let the engine run, hands resting on the steering wheel. Through the windshield, the porch lights glowed behind the curtains, the shadows of my parents moving inside. For the first time, I realized that proving the truth might not bring them back to my side. Some betrayals take root in the trust that once grew there, and nothing blooms after. The following days stretched long and colorless. I stopped answering most calls, stopped explaining. I threw myself into documentation dates, tests, logs. Thomas Reeves called once to confirm he'd received my additional files. "We'll review everything. If there's a dispute," he said. I thanked him, though my voice barely reached the words. The dispute already existed. It was simply waiting for its stage. When I wasn't working, I walked. Miles each evening through quiet streets lined with sycamores, the smell of early spring rising from the pavement. I passed windows glowing with television light and wondered what it felt like to live inside something uncomplicated. Sometimes I'd think about the garage of our childhood, how the two of us used to sit cross-legged among wires and wood glue, inventing machines that barely held together but somehow worked long enough to make us laugh. I missed that sound, the small sputter of success, the shared wonder before pride got in the way. The morning of the presentation arrived under a bright, indifferent sky. I hadn't planned to go. I told myself it was better to wait for whatever consequences came next. But the thought of her standing there, claiming my work in front of strangers, burned quietly behind my ribs. Before I realized what I was doing, I was dressing neutral blazer, plain slacks, a cap pulled low. The drive downtown felt suspended in fog, the city gliding past like a film I wasn't part of. The hotel stood like a promised glass doors revolving with people carrying portfolios and hope. I parked 2 blocks away and walked the rhythm of my steps matching the thud of my pulse. Inside, the lobby shimmered with chatter and perfume. I recognized some faces from industry events, people who'd never noticed me before. Their laughter was light, untroubled. I moved past them toward the conference hall, the sign out front shining with EOSync's logo, a green circuit leaf my idea now wearing her name. When I entered, the room was half full. My parents sat near the front, smiling unaware. Olivia stood near the podium, talking to a man I later recognized as her new CFO. Her movements were smooth, practiced. She looked radiant, exactly as she should have looked if the invention were truly hers. I found a seat at the back, the place where observers hide. As the lights dimmed and the hum of conversation faded, I felt something settle over me, stillness edged with sorrow, like the hush before a storm. Olivia took the stage to polite applause, her voice carrying easily through the microphone. She began the story I had once told her, in confidence reshaped now into something she owned. Each sentence struck with delicate precision, every technical detail polished to sound effortless. Around me, people nodded, impressed by her command. I watched without moving. The graphs on the screen, the sample data, even the phrasing of her slides, they were mine, all of them. Yet seeing them projected in that room felt surreal, as though I'd stepped into a version of my life where I didn't exist. My parents clapped proud and unaware. When Olivia smiled in their direction, I saw the faint tremor in her jaw, the flicker of something that wasn't confidence, but fear. It lasted only a second gone before anyone else noticed. But I did. It was the first crack in her perfect performance, a small truth trying to surface. I sat back, letting the applause roll forward like a tide. The proof of my work was already in motion, sealed under my name, and time-stamped for the world to see. Still in that moment, the weight of isolation pressed harder than ever. Justice I knew would come in time, but tonight I was alone in the dark, watching my sister shine beneath borrowed light. Outside, beyond the hotel glass, the city lights waited in quiet rows, blinking like patient witnesses. The presentation wasn't over yet, but the distance between us had never been greater. I folded my hands in my lap and waited for the next breath, the next moment when silence might finally turn into truth. When Olivia's voice filled the ballroom, it carried the polish of rehearsed certainty, the same tone she'd used as a teenager when convincing teachers she'd finished a project we both knew I had built. Yet hearing it now in front of strangers and family was different. Every line she delivered was an echo from my notebooks. Every statistic, every phrasing came from the life I had lived and she had borrowed. I sat in the back row, still and quiet, a part of the scenery no one would remember. My parents leaned forward with the pride I used to crave. Their faces glowed beneath the stage lights, unaware of the story unraveling behind their smiles. I could almost predict Olivia's gestures, the way she'd raise a hand before a key number paused just long enough to seem humble, then smile at the applause that followed. The screen behind her flickered with slides. I recognized the data graphs I'd generated from my apartment's tests, the same formatting, even the color gradient I'd chosen months before. The audience murmured approvingly, impressed by her clarity, by her command. To them, she was a visionary woman leading the charge into cleaner energy. To me, she was my sister, wearing a mask I'd built. Halfway through, I noticed 3 people enter quietly through the back doors. They didn't belong to this room. Their posture was too formal, their movements deliberate. I knew one of them immediately, Thomas Reeves, my patent attorney. His presence steadied my heartbeat. The 2 people with him, a man and a woman in gray suits, scanned the stage with calm precision. I didn't need an introduction. The U.S. Patent Office had answered my call. I watched the scene unfold like a slow storm. Olivia closed her presentation with perfect timing, her smile expanding under a wash of applause. My father stood first proud as any man who believed he'd just witnessed his daughter's moment of destiny. The clapping grew, and Olivia basked in it. I could feel the sound against my chest loud enough to drown a heartbeat. Then came the questions. Investors asking about patents, partnerships, manufacturing. Olivia handled each one like a practiced illusionist building layers of confidence over what she didn't own. When a woman in a gray suit asked about patent filing, Olivia didn't flinch. "We have filed all necessary protections," she said, voice smooth as silk. "Our intellectual property position is very strong." The next question came from the man beside her, David Henderson, from the patent office. His voice carried without effort. "Miss Walker, we have some concerns about your application," he said. "Specifically, its similarity to one filed 6 months earlier by a Robin Walker." For a heartbeat, the room didn't breathe. The audience looked from him to Olivia, confused by the repetition of the surname. Olivia blinked, her practiced calm flickering for the first time. "Robin is my sister," she said quickly. "There must be some misunderstanding." David nodded almost kindly. "That's what we're here to clarify." His colleague, Patricia Lawson, stepped forward holding 2 folders. The rustle of paper was loud in the stillness. The earlier filing includes designs and schematics identical to those displayed today. Down to a circuit variation with no functional purpose, a detail unique to the original inventor's work. A ripple moved through the audience. Investors whispered. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Olivia's jaw tightened, her knuckles whitening around the podium. She tried to speak, but the sound wavered. "We can resolve this privately," she managed. Thomas stepped forward, then composed as ever. "Continuing this presentation may constitute willful infringement," he said evenly. "That carries significant legal penalties." The tension broke like glass. Some people stood gathering their things, others sat frozen, unsure of what they were witnessing. Olivia's eyes searched the crowd, looking for a friendly face. She found mine instead. For a moment, we just looked at each other. All the noise around us seemed to fade, leaving only the weight of what had been broken between us. I rose from my seat and walked toward the front. My cap stayed in my hand, now no disguise left to keep. The rows parted slowly, curious faces turning to follow me. When I reached the stage, I could see her trembling slightly, her composure slipping under the truth. "This isn't your invention?" I said quietly. My voice was steady, but each word carried the ache of every sleepless night that had built this moment. "This has never been your work." I turned to the audience, meeting eyes that were a mix of confusion, pity, and dawning understanding. "My name is Robin Walker," I continued. "For 2 years, I developed the system you've seen here. The algorithms, the tests, the design, all of it was created in my home office. 6 months ago, I filed for patent protection when I realized my sister was accessing my files without permission. Someone in the crowd gasped. Others murmured quietly. Olivia's expression hardened, her voice rising brittle and sharp. "She's lying," she said. "She's jealous because I finally succeeded. She can't stand to see me recognized." David Henderson raised a hand. "Miss Walker," he said, addressing me. "This time, our office has verified the timestamps, purchase receipts, and prototypes submitted with your application. The evidence supports your claim." Patricia Lawson opened one of the folders and displayed 2 diagrams side by side. "This layout," she said, pointing to the screen, "appears in both filings down to an unnecessary notch in the circuit board. It serves no purpose, yet it's identical in both. A technical fingerprint." Gasps spread through the room. One investor stood abruptly, her voice clear. "Are you saying everything we've been shown belongs to someone else?" Thomas nodded gravely. "That's correct. And we have additional documentation, including video evidence of unauthorized access to Robin Walker's workspace." Olivia's face drained of color. "You spied on me," she whispered, disbelief curling around the edges of her words. I protected what was mine, I said. After finding my files tampered with, I had no choice. The air in the room had shifted completely. Investors were leaving the applause from earlier now, a memory replaced by the scrape of chairs and hurried steps. My parents remained seated at the front, motionless. My mother's eyes were red, her hands clasped tight in her lap. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw locked in disbelief. Security staff appeared at the side doors waiting for instruction. Gregory Pearson, the CFO, who had introduced Olivia, whispered something to her urgently. She shook her head, still clinging to the podium, as if it could anchor her. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Why, Olivia?" I asked. "You could have come to me. We could have done this together." For a moment, I saw something break through her anger, something small and frightened. "You always had everything," she said, barely above a whisper. Dad's praise, the scholarships, the talent. I just wanted one thing that was mine. I didn't answer. The words sat between us, heavy and unfixable. Thomas gestured to the officials, and they gathered their folders, signaling that their work here was done. "This presentation is concluded," he announced. "Any future use of the technology will be handled through legal channels." Investors filed out. The sound of their shoes on the carpet echoed like rain. My father finally stood, his face drawn and pale. My mother followed, reaching for his hand. They approached the stage slowly, as if unsure which of their daughters needed them more. When they reached me, my mother's eyes searched mine. "We didn't know," she said softly. She showed us everything, her notes, her drawings. "We thought I know," I said. She made it believable. My father's voice came low, almost a whisper. "I should have asked for proof," he said. I wanted to believe her. "It's over now," I replied. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. Truth might have been exposed, but it hadn't yet healed anything. As the last few people left, Michael Chen, one of the venture capital partners, approached me. His expression held the quiet professionalism of someone used to chaos. "Miss Walker," he said, "I saw the data. Regardless of this mess, what you've built is extraordinary. When the dust settles, I'd like to talk." I nodded, still stunned by the shift in tone. "Thank you," I said. He handed me his card and gave a short nod before leaving with the others. When the room finally emptied, the silence felt almost sacred. The demo unit still stood under its spotlight, the faint hum of its circuitry steady and calm. I stepped closer and rested my hand on its smooth surface. My reflection wavered in the polished casing, doubled and uncertain. This machine had been born from late night's frustration and quiet determination. It didn't care about the names printed on its side, it only wanted to work. Olivia stood by the exit, still surrounded by fragments of her illusion. She looked smaller than I remembered, the bright confidence stripped away. "This isn't over," she said, her voice breaking somewhere between anger and despair. I didn't argue. "No," I said, "it isn't." Outside the city, evening waited, cool air, soft light, and the faint smell of rain on concrete. My parents walked beside me without speaking. The hotel's glass doors closed behind us, sealing in the echoes of what had just unraveled. I turned once more to look through the glass. The stage lights inside were dimming one by one, leaving the room half in shadow. For the first time, I didn't feel rage or triumph, just a deep, aching stillness. The truth was out, but the silence that followed it would be the harder part. I knew the coming days would demand patience, paperwork, and forgiveness I didn't yet have. When I reached my car, my father touched my shoulder gently. "We'll come by tomorrow," he said. "You shouldn't go through this alone." I nodded, grateful for the quiet promise. As I drove home through the thinning rain, the windshield wipers beat a slow rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. The city lights blurred gold and white like reflections from another life. Back in my apartment, the lights turned on automatically soft, warm, responsive. My invention recognized me even when my family hadn't. I stood in the doorway for a long while, letting the quiet wrap around me. Justice had begun its work, but healing still waited somewhere beyond the noise. The morning after the presentation felt strangely silent, as if the whole city was pausing to take a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for weeks. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in narrow lines, catching the thin layer of dust on my workbench. My prototype still sat where I'd left it steady as a heartbeat. It was the one thing in my life that hadn't lied. My parents called around 8. My mother's voice trembled not with anger, but disbelief. "We had no idea," she said. She was so sure, Robin. She had diagrams, notes, everything. My father said little. When he finally spoke, it was softer than I'd expected. "You did the right thing," he told me. It took courage to stand there. His words didn't feel like victory. They felt like a late apology, the kind that comes after something sacred has already cracked. Later that day, I met with Thomas Reeves in his office downtown. His shelves were lined with case files and photographs of clients who'd come through worse storms than mine. He reviewed the paperwork from the patent office and smiled faintly. "Your position is solid," he said. "The evidence is undeniable. What happens next is mostly cleanup." I nodded, though cleanup didn't sound quite right for what I was feeling. There's no tidy way to sweep betrayal into a corner. Outside, the city was bright and cold. I walked the length of the block without direction, passing shop windows full of things that belonged to people who hadn't had their lives rearranged in public. My reflection followed me everywhere, half-shadowed and unsure. That night, I barely slept. The sound of Olivia's voice still echoed faintly in my head, the way she'd said, "This is my breakthrough moment," before the truth folded in around her. By morning, news had already spread. Articles appeared online describing the incident at the Grand Plaza Hotel. Clean energy startup collapses amid intellectual property dispute. Another headline read, "Family ties and a high-tech betrayal." I didn't read past the first few paragraphs. The facts were all there: dates, patent filings, statements from the patent office. Facts had won, but they didn't feel like enough. By the end of the week, I received a call from Michael Chen, the investor who had approached me after the chaos. He invited me to his office, a quiet corner suite overlooking the harbor. The air smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. He greeted me with a handshake that felt more like a promise than a formality. "What you've built deserves a fair chance," he said. "If you're willing to start again, we'd like to help you do it the right way." I listened as he outlined his proposal: seed funding, a small team, complete creative control. For a long moment, I stared at the folder in front of me, the company name typed neatly across the top, Walker Energy Systems. It felt both strange and right, like a name finally finding its rightful place. "I want transparency," I said quietly. "If we build this, every idea, every person involved gets credit. No secrets, no shortcuts." Michael smiled. "That's exactly why I'm here." Signing the papers took less time than I expected. When I left his office, the afternoon light had turned golden, stretching long shadows across the sidewalk. I felt the faintest stirring of something I hadn't felt in months. Hope tentative, but alive. The next few weeks passed in a blur of motion. I rented a modest workspace on the edge of the city, once a printing press, now lined with new desks and the smell of fresh paint. Thomas introduced me to a few trusted engineers, and by the end of the month, there were 6 of us, a small group bound by quiet determination. I worked long hours, but the exhaustion felt different now. It wasn't despair. It was rebuilding. My parents visited one afternoon, bringing sandwiches and awkward smiles. My mother wandered through the space, touching the edge of a desk, as if afraid the walls might vanish. "It's good to see you happy again," she said softly. My father nodded in agreement, his eyes lingering on the prototype resting under a lamp. "You were right to protect it," he said. "We should have believed you sooner." I didn't tell them that forgiveness had become a process rather than a decision. It would take time for trust to grow again, and even longer for the silence between us to feel like peace. But that afternoon, as we ate together, surrounded by the hum of machines, something in the air felt less heavy. Meanwhile, Olivia vanished from the headlines as quickly as she'd entered them. The company she'd built on stolen work collapsed within days. Gregory Pearson resigned and issued a public statement expressing regret for his oversight. I didn't read Olivia's name again until a small article mentioned she'd moved to Chicago to pursue new opportunities. It sounded clinical, distant, almost kind. I told myself I didn't care, though. Late at night, I still caught myself wondering how she was managing. Guilt has a way of clinging to the edges of family, even when you're the one who was wronged. Months passed. Walker Energy Systems grew faster than I expected. With proper resources and a team that believed in the work, we reached milestones that had once felt impossible. 3 commercial buildings completed pilot installations within the first quarter, each showing consistent savings. We celebrated quietly, pizza boxes on folding tables, the soft laughter of people who understood what it meant to build something real. One evening, after everyone had gone home, I stayed behind, walking through the dim office. The lights followed me, automatically flicking on in sequence. I stopped by the window and watched the city breathe the skyline, a pattern of light and shadow, an accidental reminder of everything my invention stood for. When I finally locked up and stepped outside, the air was cool and damp. Across the street, a small cafe was closing for the night. The owner, a middle-aged man named Frank, who always left the door open until the last customer finished, gave me a wave. "You're here late again," he said. "Old habits," I replied. He smiled knowingly. "Keep the lights off when you can," he said, chuckling as he flipped the sign on the door. I walked home under the street lamps, their glow soft against the wet pavement. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel hunted by what had happened. The anger had quieted, replaced by a cautious sort of peace. Then a few months later, my father called again. His voice was hesitant. "Your sister reached out," he said. "She's trying to make things right. We thought you should know." I stood by the window, the city lights reflecting faintly against the glass. I didn't answer right away. "I appreciate you telling me," I said, finally, "but I'm not ready." "That's fair," he replied. "She's in therapy now. She says she's been thinking a lot about what happened." After the call, I sat at my desk, tracing the outline of the original circuit sketch still pinned above it. Part of me wanted to believe she was changing. Another part knew I couldn't build hope on her words alone. Weeks turned into months. Walker Energy Systems launched officially that spring, its first major client signing a long-term contract. My parents came to the small ribbon-cutting ceremony. Reporters asked careful questions about innovation, teamwork, and resilience. No one mentioned Olivia, and I was grateful. The past had already taken enough space in my story. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I found a small envelope tucked into the reception desk drawer. No name on the front, just a faint imprint of perfume I recognized instantly. Inside was a single note in Olivia's handwriting. I saw the article. "I'm proud of you. I'm sorry for everything. Oh." I folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. The apology didn't erase what had happened, but it was something, maybe the first honest word between us in years. The following morning, I arrived early to the office. The building was quiet, except for the hum of the systems coming online. Sunlight cut through the high windows, scattering across the walls. I walked to the workbench and touched the edge of the latest prototype, its surface cool under my palm. Somewhere in the distance, the world was still talking about energy and innovation, about numbers and savings. But standing there, I understood that what mattered most wasn't the technology. It was the people around me now, the ones who'd chosen truth over convenience, integrity over applause. When my team arrived, we began the day as we always did, with coffee, gentle teasing, and the quiet focus that comes from shared purpose. As I watched them work, I realized that the invention Olivia had tried to steal had already grown into something she never could have built. It wasn't just a system anymore. It was a reflection of the values I refused to abandon. That evening, when I left the office, the sky was streaked in orange and gold. The city below shimmered with light, each building alive in its own rhythm. I paused before getting into my car, breathing in the calm of the moment. Somewhere far away, my sister was starting over. Somewhere closer, my parents were finally sleeping without worry. I didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to face it. The truth had cost me dearly, but it had also given me something I'd never expected: a life built on steady ground. As the sun disappeared behind the skyline, I whispered a quiet thank you to the silence that remained. It was the kind that no longer hurt. It was the kind that meant I'd finally found peace in my own light. The first year after everything ended moved quietly like the city in early morning, before anyone remembers to be in a hurry. My life filled with the small rhythms I used to overlook: coffee cooling beside a laptop, the hum of servers coming alive before dawn, the steady pulse of purpose instead of chaos. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It drifts in like light through blinds, soft enough that you hardly notice until the room feels different. Walker Energy Systems had grown into something solid, something honest. We had nearly 50 employees by spring, each one chosen not just for skill, but for how they carried themselves when no one was watching. I'd made a rule that every design or algorithm bore the creator's name in our records. When I walked through the lab, I saw those names etched beside the circuits and screens, proof that transparency could be as powerful as innovation. My parents visited often, always bringing food we didn't need and staying longer than planned. My mother said the office reminded her of the university labs, where she once worked, full of curiosity instead of competition. My father liked to linger near the prototypes, running his hands over the casings as if he could feel the heartbeat inside. "You built this the right way?" he said, once his voice quiet enough to disappear beneath the hum of machines. It was the closest thing to an apology I ever needed. Olivia's presence returned slowly, like a tide that no longer wanted to drown anyone. Months after her letter, she sent another note, handwritten this time, in the looping script I'd memorized as a child. She asked if I'd meet her for coffee. I hesitated for days before agreeing. We met at a small cafe near the botanical gardens, the kind of place with creaky floors and windows that fog in winter. She looked different, tired maybe, but lighter, in a way I hadn't expected. She spoke softly, choosing her words like someone measuring ingredients, careful not to spill too much. "I've been working with a nonprofit," she said, "marketing for environmental outreach programs. It's not glamorous, but it's real. I like it." I studied her face. There was no performance in her eyes this time, no rehearsed charm. Just a woman trying to rebuild the ground beneath her feet. "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it. We talked about small things after that: the weather, our parents, the city's impossible parking. When we said goodbye, she hugged me carefully, the way you handle something fragile but worth keeping. That moment didn't erase what had happened, but it started to make peace possible. A few weeks later, she visited our parents for Sunday dinner. I joined them, unsure how it would feel. The air was thick with the scent of rosemary chicken, and something unspoken. But when Olivia arrived with a basket of bread from her favorite bakery, my mother smiled the way she used to when both of us still lived at home. Dinner was quiet, awkward at first, but it softened as the night went on. Olivia listened more than she spoke. My father told one of his old classroom stories, and to my surprise, she laughed, really laughed, not the polished sound I remembered from her presentations. When I caught her glance across the table, she held it for a second, then looked down with a small smile. It was enough. The months that followed were filled with forward motion. Our technology reached new markets, and I spent more time on the road visiting schools, meeting with clients, standing in front of people who wanted to know how it all began. I never told the story of betrayal. I told the story of perseverance, of learning that even when someone steals your work, they can't steal your spirit unless you hand it over. One afternoon, while preparing for a university talk, I found the small wooden box Olivia had returned to me. I hadn't opened it in years. The hinges creaked softly as I lifted the lid. Inside were our childhood treasures, old photographs, bits of wire, a single feather we once swore came from an eagle. Tucked beneath them was a folded note I hadn't noticed before. "I hope someday we'll invent something together again," it said. "Maybe not a machine, but something better." Oh. I closed the lid and sat with it for a long while, the room warm with late afternoon light. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a single moment, but a series of quiet decisions to see someone not as what they did, but as what they could still become. Years moved on. Walker Energy Systems became known not just for innovation, but for ethics, something I was proud of. We launched mentorship programs for young women in engineering, helping them protect their ideas and navigate spaces that often overlooked them. Watching their confidence grow reminded me of who I had been before. Betrayal found me curious, hopeful, unguarded. At one of those mentorship events, Olivia showed up unexpectedly. She had brought a group from her nonprofit eager to help us with community outreach. Seeing her there, surrounded by students, felt surreal but right. She stayed near the back, letting others shine. Afterward, she came over and handed me a small pamphlet her team had made its title simple and honest, Building with Integrity. "I thought you might like it," she said. I smiled. "I do." We stood together for a while, watching the young women pack their notes and gadgets, their laughter filling the hall. It was the sound of the next generation learning not just how to invent, but how to belong. In the years since that day, the world has kept moving, as it always does. Some mornings, I still walk to the river trail before work, watching the city wake beneath soft clouds. The air smells of rain and new beginnings. My phone fills with messages, updates from my team notes from students, reminders from my parents about Sunday dinner. And sometimes, a short text from Olivia, thinking of you. Hope your week's kind. We are not the sisters we once were, but we are something steadier now. The past is no longer a wound, just a scar that reminds me where strength took root. Last winter, we attended an awards ceremony together. Walker Energy Systems received national recognition for environmental innovation. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage and looked out at the crowd. Olivia was in the third row sitting beside our parents, her hands clasped together, eyes bright. She didn't need to say anything. Her expression said enough. Later that night, after the applause faded and the hall emptied, I slipped outside into the cold air. Snow had begun to fall in soft flakes, catching the light of the street lamps. The world was quiet in the way it only is after a long, hard fight, peaceful, unafraid. I stood there a while, letting the snow melt against my gloves, and thought about the long road that had led me here, the betrayal, the anger, the rebuilding. Each step had stripped something away until only truth remained. Peace, I've learned, isn't the absence of pain. It's the understanding that some storms are meant to clear the air. If this story spoke to you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever had to rebuild trust or start over after a loss. I'd love to hear how you found your calm. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the power of finding peace in your own light. Because sometimes, after all the noise fades, what stays isn't the applause. It's the silence that finally feels like home.